The story you've been told about the B-29 is that it dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That is true. It is also the least important thing the B-29 did. By the time those two bombs fell in August 1945, B-29s had already burned 67 Japanese cities to the ground. The firebombing of Tokyo alone killed more people in a single night than either atomic bomb. The war was already over. The B-29 had already ended it. The bombs were punctuation. This is not a story about the atomic bomb. This is a story about why the most advanced bomber ever built made an entire empire's air defense system irrelevant, and why Japan, despite years of warning, could not build a single aircraft capable of stopping it. Tama, central Japan, 47 miles west of Tokyo, November 1944, just before noon. A sergeant pilot of the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force is climbing. He is 22 years old. He has fewer than 120 hours of flight time. His aircraft is a Nakajima Ki 44 Shoki, a stubby, blunt-nosed interceptor designed for a war that no longer exists. His orders are to intercept a formation of American bombers passing over the Kanto Plain at 31,000 feet. He has been climbing for 19 minutes. His engine is losing power. The air at 28,000 feet is too thin for his carburetor to deliver a proper fuel mixture. His controls feel soft. His airspeed is falling. He can see the bombers above him. Silver, enormous, leaving contrails so white they look painted against the sky. They are still 3,000 feet above him and pulling away. He will not reach them. He will try again the following morning. That morning he will not come back. $3 billion. That is the number that defines this story. The B-29 Superfortress cost the United States $3 billion 1940s dollars to develop and produce. More than the Manhattan Project. More than the atomic bomb itself. The most expensive single weapons program of the entire war, and most people have never heard that figure. To understand why Japan's fighter pilots failed against the B-29, you first have to understand what they believed, and what they believed was not unreasonable. In December 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy and Army Air Forces were among the most experienced combat air arms on Earth. Japanese pilots had been fighting continuously in China since 1937. The Mitsubishi A6M0 was the finest carrier-based fighter in the Pacific. Japanese doctrine held that pilot skill, aggression, and warrior spirit could overcome material disadvantage. For 2 years after Pearl Harbor, that doctrine appeared to be correct. Japanese fighters shot down American aircraft at ratios that should have been impossible for a nation with Japan's industrial base. Japan's homeland air defense was built on a simple, logical assumption. Enemy bombers, if they ever reached the home islands, would fly at altitudes reachable by existing fighters and anti-aircraft guns. The standard interceptors assigned to homeland defense, aircraft like the Nakajima Ki 44 Shoki and the Kawasaki Ki 61 Hien, were designed for engagements between 15,000 and 25,000 feet. The anti-aircraft guns defending Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, and Kobe were primarily the Type 88 75mm, with an effective ceiling of roughly 20,000 feet. Above that, their accuracy dropped to nearly zero. Their assessment was not insane. It was based on the best available evidence. Every bomber Japan had encountered in combat, the B-17, the B-24, the Consolidated Liberator, operated at altitudes within reach of competent fighters and concentrated flak. No air force on Earth had a bomber that could sustain combat operations above 30,000 feet, while carrying a meaningful bomb load at strategic range. The problem was that America had been building exactly that aircraft since 1940, and it was not an incremental improvement, it was a different category of machine. The B-29 Superfortress was not an evolution of the B-17 Flying Fortress, it was a leap. General Henry Arnold, commanding general of the United States Army Air Forces, had issued requirements in 1940 for a bomber with hemispheric range, a pressurized crew environment, and defensive firepower independent of individual human gunners. He wanted an aircraft that could strike targets anywhere on Earth from bases in the continental United States or its forward territories. Boeing's design team in Seattle, led by engineers including Edward Curtis Wells, answered with an aircraft so advanced that the factories building it had to invent new production methods to assemble it. The development nearly collapsed. The prototype, the XB-29, first flew on September 21, 1942. The second prototype crashed on February 18, 1943, killing Boeing's chief test pilot Edmund T. Allen and his entire crew when an engine fire spread to the wing. The R-3350 engines were burning themselves alive. Arnold did not cancel the program. He doubled down. He ordered the aircraft into mass production before the design was finished, a decision unprecedented in American aviation history. By the spring of 1944, Hundreds of B-29s sat on the tarmac in Wichita, Kansas, technically delivered but riddled with defects. The Battle of Kansas, they called it. Thousands of modification teams worked around the clock in open fields, through a Kansas winter, fixing aircraft by hand, one at a time, until they were flyable. It was chaos organized by willpower. Start with the cabin. The B-29 was the first combat bomber in history with a fully pressurized fuselage. The crew of 11 operated in shirt sleeves at 31,000 feet. A pressurized tunnel above the twin bomb bays connected the forward and aft crew compartments. This was not a comfort feature. Pressurization meant that at altitudes where the crews of B-17s and Lancasters were slowly losing cognitive function, from hypoxia, frostbite, and exhaustion, B-29 crews could think clearly, operate instruments precisely, and fight for hours without physical degradation. Then the guns. 12.50 caliber machine guns and 120mm cannon, mounted in 4 remote-controlled turrets and a tail position. No gunner touched a weapon directly. They sat inside the pressurized cabin, sighting through periscopic stations linked to a central fire control computer, built by General Electric. That computer, the most advanced analog computing system ever installed in an aircraft, calculated deflection, range, airspeed, altitude, wind, temperature, and bullet drops simultaneously. Multiple gunners could assign targets to any turret. The system solved firing equations faster than any human crew could. Pause on that. This was 1944. The B-29 had a computerized weapon system. Japanese interceptor pilots were aiming through ring and bead sights with their bare hands. And the altitude? 4 Wright R3350 duplex Cyclone engines, twin-row 18-cylinder radials producing over 2,200 horsepower each, equipped with turbo superchargers that maintained power at extreme altitude. General Electric turbochargers compressed thin, high-altitude air and fed it to the engines at near sea level density. The result was a service ceiling of 31,850 feet and a maximum speed of 357 miles per hour at altitude. The B-29 did not struggle to reach 31,000 feet. It cruised there. The range was 3,250 miles. From the Mariana Islands, the B-29 could fly 1,400 miles to any target in Japan, bomb it, and return. No refueling, no forward staging, just distance. Eliminated. $3 billion, more than the bomb that ended the war. That number again, because it matters. It was the price of making geography irrelevant. Every view, every like on this video keeps these names and these numbers visible to people who have never heard them. If this story matters to you, the subscribe button ensures you see the next one. There are more of these. Here is the deeper system. Here is why Japan could not answer the B-29. And it has nothing to do with courage or willingness to die. Japan's fighter pilots were brave, some were extraordinary. The 244th Sentai, an army fighter unit stationed at Chofu Airfield near Tokyo, under the command of Major Teruhiko Kobayashi, developed dedicated anti-B-29 tactics. They studied the bombers' blind spots. They climbed to maximum altitude before the formations arrived, attacked head-on where the defensive fire coverage was weakest, and pressed to point-blank range. Some pilots of the Shinton Special Attack Units, formed specifically to destroy B-29s, flew their aircraft directly into the bombers, ramming attacks. Deliberate, knowing, final. These were not the acts of incompetent men. They were the acts of desperate men fighting a system's failure with individual sacrifice. The system's failure was industrial. Japan did not have turbocharger technology. American turbochargers used exhaust gases to drive a turbine that compressed intake air, maintaining engine power at altitude. Japanese engineers understood the theory. They could not manufacture the precision turbine blades required, the metallurgy, the tolerances, the specialized alloys. None of it was within Japan's industrial reach by 1944. Without turbochargers, Japanese fighter engines lost power progressively as altitude increased. The Ki-44 Shoki had a rated ceiling of 36,000 feet on paper. In operational practice, above 28,000 feet, it could barely maneuver. It arrived at intercept altitude with almost no energy, no speed advantage, and perhaps 30 seconds of useful combat time before it stalled or had to dive away. The Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate, arguably the finest Japanese fighter of the war, was superb at medium altitude. At 30,000 feet it was sluggish and unresponsive. The Mitsubishi J-2M Raiden, designed specifically as a high-altitude interceptor for the Navy, suffered chronic engine reliability problems, and was produced in desperately small numbers, fewer than 500 total. The Kawasaki Ki-45 Toryu, a twin-engine heavy fighter pressed into the interceptor role, was simply too slow. This is not a moral judgment. It is an observation about how systems fail, and the failures compounded each other. Japan's aircraft industry in 1944 produced fewer than 28,000 aircraft. America produced nearly 100,000. But production numbers alone do not capture the depth of the collapse. Japan was running out of aviation fuel. American submarine warfare had strangled the supply lines from the Dutch East Indies. By early 1945, Homeland Defense fighter units were rationing fuel so severely that training flights were being cancelled. Pilots could not practice the high-altitude intercept tactics they needed because there was not enough fuel to climb to 30,000 feet and come back down. Japan was also losing experienced pilots faster than it could train replacements. The veterans of the early war, the men who had fought over China, over Midway, over Guadalcanal, were dead or scattered across the Pacific. By late 1944, Homeland Defense units were receiving pilots with fewer than 100 hours of total flight time. They were being asked to climb to 31,000 feet in aircraft that could barely reach that altitude, against a bomber defended by a computer that could track, calculate, and fire faster than any human being alive. The collision came in stages, and each stage was worse than the last. The first B-29 combat mission launched on June 5, 1944, from bases in India against railroad targets in Bangkok. The first strike against the Japanese home islands flew from Chengdu, China on June 15, 1944, when 68 B-29s of the 20th Bomber Command attacked the Imperial Iron and Steel Works at Yawata on Kyushu. The results were negligible. Only 47 aircraft actually bombed the target, but the psychological impact on Japan was significant. A bomber had reached the home islands from the Asian mainland, bombed an industrial target and flown away, the B-29 superfortress. Japan's pilots tried everything: high-altitude interception, head-on attacks, night fighters, ramming, sacrifice. Nothing worked, not because they were not brave enough, because the machine they were fighting had been built, from the first blueprint to the last rivet, to make bravery irrelevant.